Saiyan Salamander here, and welcome to another edition of Outrealm Heroes. For those of you that are new to the series, or just new to the channel in general, let me give you a quick rundown of what it's all about. Basically, I take characters from different games, anime, comic books, any series besides Fire Emblem that I'm interested in, and bring them over to the mobile game Fire Emblem Heroes, and theorycraft how they'd work in that game. As much as I love theory crafting from as many different series as possible, I've been really in the mood to go back and talk about even more characters from a series that I've already covered on the channel. One series in particular being Dragalia Lost, since I've been playing a ton while the anniversary event's been on. The game just wrapped up part 2 of its Faith Forsaken event, or at least that's when I planned on releasing this video, but with how behind I currently am, it may end up coming out a while after it's finished. Anyway, I thought who better to talk about than the stars of the event itself, the Apostles of the Ilyan Church. Harley's a pretty big player in this event too, but I figured I'd already be talking about 6 characters this time around, as opposed to the 5 that we'd normally get, so I figured I'd save Harley for another video. For now though, let's just focus on the Apostles themselves, starting with one of the first ones introduced, the Wings of Revelation, Nevin. Thankfully Nevin is on the side of the Apostles that are fairly easy to translate into Fae, at least weapon-wise, as in Dragalia he's a Shadow Dagger unit, so in Fae I made him an Infantry Dagger unit. Nevin is a really interesting character in Dragalia since he can buff himself and his allies with his Victoria strategy skill, while also dealing more damage while buffs are active, going even further with the damage scaling if Nevin set up those buffs himself, with his second ability, Magnus Apocalypse. I ended up focusing on translating Magnus Apocalypse into his weapon, since his daggers are already insanely powerful with that inbuilt ability alone, so until these current modern units get a refine, he'll just have to stick to the one ability. Nevin's weapons is called Ramiel's Revelation. It grants him an accelerated special cooldown and grants him an additional effect depending on how many buffs he currently has active. If Nevin's got 10 buffs or more, he'll gain a Blade Tome effect. 15 buffs or more gives him a kind of Blade Tome Savage Blow, dealing more damage based on how many buffs are active on Nevin. 20 buffs or more gives Nevin an increased special cooldown per attack. 25 buffs or more gives him a Null Penalty Disrupt, cancelling any of the foe's effects that inflict penalty or nullify bonuses during combat. And finally, 30 buffs or more gives Nevin a damage reduction skill that reduces more damage based on how many buffs he has active. And before you tell me Nevin's absolutely bonkers, well, there's more! Magnus Apocalypse did more damage if Nevin set up the buffs himself. So any buff given by himself is doubled and counted as a sort of phantom buff, like Phantom Speed or Res. Nevin's buffs aren't really doubled when he buffed himself, but the doubled points will count towards activating all his weapon effects and increasing how effective they are. I feel like there would need to be some sort of cut-off point though, so even if you have the bonuses and stats, it won't improve Nevin's abilities any further. Like, can you imagine 7 buffs in each stat for 28 buffs? 28 more if Nevin gave all of those buffs to himself, and finally an additional 28 points if you inherited bonus doubler onto him, for a grand total of 76. So yeah, without some sort of bonus cap, 76 damage reduction, damage increase, etc. sounds extremely busted. And I'm not really a game balancer though, so I don't know what kind of cap it should be. Moving on to the rest of Nevin's kit, he shares an exclusive special skill with the rest of the Apostles called Sigil Release. It's basically Radiant Ether, but it's got the Deadeye damage reduction disabler skill built into it too. I figured Radiant Ether has since been buffed with Radiant Ether 2, and while it's extremely good buff, it's nothing too crazy like with Nevin's weapon. Nevin's also got Close Riposte, which is a speed version of the new Close Reversal skill that we got a few months ago. Null C Disrupt free, and Times Pulse free. It's pretty interesting trying to transfer Dragalia characters into Fae, since the stat spread between both games is completely different. Fae has HP, attack, defense, resistance, and speed, whereas Dragalia just has strength and HP. So I kinda just have to wing it and go with my gut on what each character has. Nevin doesn't really excel or fail in any particular area, having a good offensive spread while also maintaining fairly decent defensive stats too. His Res is his weakest stat, but he's also got a Super Boon in it, which is pretty good. He's also got a Super Bane in Speed though, so make sure to try get an extra copy of him if you get unlucky with his Bane. Overall, Nevin is the first of many bonkers units on this banner, and I may have made his weapon a bit too crazy, but hey, it's Fire Emblem. With the way we get power creep these days, it's only a matter of time before we get a 251-page biography on what each character's weapon does. You may want to inherit 1 or 2 more skills onto him though, or give him a good S-seal so he can buff up all his stats himself, just so you can get the full effect out of his weapon. But aside from that, he's got a great kit, and he's definitely a unit to summon, whether you want to use him or fodder him. The other Apostle to debut alongside Nevin is the 4-star demote hero of the banner, the Wing of Purity, Painan. Paimon was also pretty easy to transfer into Fae, thanks to her being a water bow character in Dragalia. And since there isn't really any movement types in Dragalia, I just made her an infantry blue bow unit in Fae. Her weapon is called Sanctus Bow, since she's got a skill in Dragalia called Sanctus Arrows. Instead of basing the effects on one of her skills like with Nevin, the first idea that popped into my head was basing it off of the angel she has a pact with, Gabriel. Gabriel acts like a very doting mother to Paimon. So to reflect this, I think the skill that would work best is Wings of Mercy, but of course I power crept it to a high heaven. If any one of Paimon's allies is at 75% HP or below, or they're inflicted with a penalty, then Paimon can teleport anywhere within 2 spaces of them, and gains +5 to all of her stats during combat if she initiates after teleporting. Paimon's a lot more min-max than Nevin, having a ton of speed, being the fastest of the apostles, and having higher stats than him in every area. She just suffers from extremely poor defense. She's even got Super Bane in it and HP, but she makes up for it with a super boon in attack, speed, and resistance too. Her base kit isn't nearly as good as Nevin's being a 4-star character at all, but for a demote unit her skills are pretty amazing. Water Sweep is a pretty underused skill in the game, and it's pretty annoying to obtain, since the easiest way is spending 20k feathers on a Soren, since you can only get it from him when he's at 5 stars, and every other character with the skill is a 5-star exclusive. So having the skill unlockable at 4-star finally is really good, and what's almost even better is she's got attack speed catch free in her kit too. But because it's a lot more of a newer skill, I decided to keep it a 5-star for now, and just focused on demoting Water Sweep instead. And like I mentioned earlier with Nevin, like him and the rest of the apostles, she gets Sigil Release as an uninheritable special skill too. While she'll need a ton of investment with her being a 4-star hero, she won't be too hard to merge up, and is definitely a fantastic option if you're thinking of adding an archer to your team. Now normally I talk about all 4 of the banner characters first, and then talk about any Grand Hero Battle unit or free 5-star character you can get in completing quests in the game at the end. However, I figured I should save the leader of the apostles till last, and since I already mentioned one 4-star hero, I'd like to talk about the Grand Hero Battle and 5-star quest hero first, before going back and talking about the final 5-star characters of the banner later. So next up is the Wing of War Basilius. In Dragalia, Basilius is a Wind Wand hero, but wands aren't really weapons in Dragalia, so I figured making him a green tome unit was the next best option. His weapon is called Vengeful Storm, and aside from the +3 attack he gets from his weapon, I wanted his wand to reference how Basilius' skills work differently depending on if he's fighting up close or at range. So in order to fight up close, he's got close counter built into his weapon. If he's fighting close range thanks to a skill like close counter, Basilius inflicts lull attack, defense, speed, and resistance against the foe. Whereas if he's fighting at range, he'll deal a percentage of his attack stat to the foes within the same line that he's attacking in. I was thinking 20% of his attack, but I don't know what would be a good number, since while it's always active when attacking at range, it requires very specific positioning from the foe, so I think 20% or possibly higher is fine. As for Wing of War, he's got a super boon in attack, and I figured defense was fitting too, since he's a kind of mage I guess with the wand, but he's also great at fighting up close too. I'm thinking he'd have a super bane in HP and resistance though. But thankfully as a Grand Hero Battle unit, you wouldn't need to worry about that much, since if you're investing trait fruits into him to give him those boons and banes, you're probably investing in grails to merge him up too. For his skills, of course he gets Sigil Release for his special like the other apostles, and he gets Fury Free at 5-star and Rouse Attack Defense at 4-star, which isn't nearly as good for fodder as Paimon, but they're both good skills and I think they suit his character well. While I don't think he's the best mage in the game, I definitely think he'd be one of the most unique characters, and I'd love to see all the fun and interesting ways that people try to create his character, and what kind of allies would work best while teaming up with him. If you complete some quests or some kind of Dragalia event that goes alongside the game, or maybe if you just have a Dragalia Lost account, you can also get 2 or 3 copies of Rosada, the Wing of Enlightenment. So she's a bit weird with her weapon since she counts as a lance unit in Dragalia, but she looks like she attacks people more with her fists instead. And if you've watched some of my other videos, I theory crafted how brawlers would work in Fae, since it's a new weapon class we got in the latest game in the series, Fire Emblem Three Houses. Because of that, instead of keeping her as a lance hero, I made her an infantry colourless brawler. And if you missed my brawler theory crafting, which will be linked with some other Fae videos at the end of the video, then basically brawlers are an improved brave weapon, always having the brave effect built into the weapon, without any of those pesky might and stat reductions that they'd usually come with, aside from maybe having 14 might instead of 16 might, like most melee heroes do, but that's about it. Her weapon is called Archangel's Fists, and aside from having the standard brawler effect, she also gains plus 5 HP. And if Rizada takes damage or KOs the foe, her allies within 2 spaces gain a shield that nullifies damage up to 40 or 50% of her max HP, as a reference to her co-ability, Raphael's Protection. As you'd imagine, with an ability like that, she'd have to have a lot of HP, and she does! 51 HP combined with a plus 5 in hero weapon gives her 56 HP, and that's before any merges, dragon flowers, boons, and summoner support. That boon is a super boon by the way, so with all of that plus her A skill, that's a whopping 75 HP. She's also got the highest attack in the game with an insane stat of 48, with some pretty great speed too, sitting at 41. She does have some pretty weak defense and resistance, but with enough merges, dragon flowers, and maybe a little bit of help from a damage reduction skill like Frenzy, that won't matter to her too much. I gave her a super boon in attack and speed, and HP, since those are her high stats, but because she's not the most confident being in the world, I gave her a super bane in each of the stats too, to try reference that aspect of her personality. I already started talking about her skills a little while ago, but she's got Sea Duel Infantry 3 at 4 star, and Breath of Life 3 at 5 star. I figured her A-slot skill would combo really well with her weapon, and make the skill a lot more easier to obtain, since I think currently it's only available on Loki and Yuri, so it'd be nice to have the skill just a little bit easier to obtain. And just like the other Apostle, she's got Sigil Release for a special move. Overall, she's an insanely powerful min-max brawler, and with even just the slightest bit of investment, she'll be an absolutely bonkers unit, taking out foes herself to start off a combat phase before giving her allies some shield support before they initiate too. Going from one unique weapon wielder to another, the next unit I'll be talking about also uses a weapon that currently isn't in Fae, which are guns, or manacasters as they're referred to in Dragalia last. The 5th character in this video is the Wing of Righteousness, Faris. Faris is another one of the apostles that appear on the banner, and he's only available at 5-star rarity. Before I talk about him though, let me briefly talk about manacaster weapons like his, and how they work in Fae, in case you missed my weapon theory crafting video I made a while back. The brief rundown is that manacasters or guns come in 4 different colour variations, with each colour having a different built-in weapon effect, kinda like how beasts have a different built-in effect depending on their movement type. I'm thinking maybe there'd be an extra feature where they could have a different type of bullet, with some characters using physical bullets that will deal damage against the foe's defense, or mana bullets which will deal damage against the foe's resistance. If you want to see what each colour does, then definitely make sure to check out my weapon theory crafting video, which will be linked in the description. But as for red guns like the one Faris has, he has a built-in desperation effect, and he'd probably shoot magic bullets too, aiming for the foe's resistance. Faris is an infantry unit like the rest of his comrades in the Apostles, and since movement classes don't exist in Dragalia, I don't really see any reason to make them anything else but infantry units. So if you're summoning on this banner and you're desperate for dragon flowers, then good for you I guess. Faris' weapon is called Perfect Pistol. Him and his angel Uriel are kind of perfectionists and are constantly scoring themselves and others, so I figured a perfectionist like him would always try to be in perfect condition at 100% HP. So for his weapon, no matter what the activation conditions are, for any non-special skill that Faris has, they'll always activate if he's at 100% HP, meaning he can use Vantage if he's equal to or below 75% HP like normal, or when he's at 100% HP as well. Or you can use skills like Times Pulse even when Faris' special isn't at minimum charge, or Swift Sparrow on enemy phase as long as his HP is full. Despite not having access to the skill that I'll be referencing here, if Faris has a skill like Spurn too, that'll activate based on a percentage of their speed. However, if the speed condition is not met but the HP condition is, Spurn will still activate, but only for half of the max capacity, maybe even a quarter of max capacity. If Faris naturally meets the conditions of the skill, it will prioritise that if it means he uses a higher percentage. For Faris' other skills, of course he has Sigil Release like the rest of the Apostles, but he also comes with Swift Sparrow 3 and Null Follow-Up 3 as well, which are 2 pretty decent skills to come equipped with. As for Faris' stats, I'm thinking with him trying to get a perfect score and everything, he'd have a super boon and everything too, which I think's fine, and I'm sure Shamir and 1 or 2 other characters have it as well, and it just gives them more options to choose from. Besides that, his stats are fairly well balanced too, since I didn't want him scoring low marks in any area in particular. Overall, Faris is a really well-rounded unit, and his unique weapon will ensure that he'll stay relevant despite any characters that will come after him. And he'll be especially good if you manage to get some merges and dragonflowers in, turning him from a jack of all trades to a monster in all stats. Finally, the reason why I wanted to talk about our 3 heroes before moving back to the banner characters later on is because I figured I'd save talking about the commander of the Apostles till last. So finally, let's talk about 5 Wings commander, Regina. Who appears in Fae as an infantry sword user. Swords work a little differently in Dragalia than they do in Fae. Since in Dragalia, sword-type weapons are split into swords, blades, and knives, where in Fae you've just got swords and daggers. Regina's a blade unit in Dragalia, so I figured that would translate best into a sword unit instead. Before I go into her weapon though, I want to talk about all the skills she comes with first. Of course I gave her Sigil Release for her special skill, because I did the same for all the other apostles, and I gave her Surge Sparrow and Mystic Boost 3 as well. As the leader of the apostles, I thought I'd give her own unique special too, which is called Astriam Protocol, to reference the world that she's been summoned into now. I think I based it on one of Sandalphon's skills, because that's the angel Regina's formed a pack with. Astriam Protocol has two effects, with one activating being determined on the condition of allies within 2 spaces, but the activation conditions are a little complicated. So say if there's 3 allies within 2 spaces of Regina that are at 75% HP or less, Regina will heal them for about 15 to 25% of their max HP. However, if there's only 2 allies within 2 spaces, then the activation condition is that they both need to be at least 50% HP or less, or one of them can be at 25% HP and 75% HP each. Finally, if there's only 1 ally within 3 spaces, then that ally has to be at 25% HP or less to receive the healing buff. If these conditions aren't met though, then any allies within 2 spaces will gain a new condition called Overdamage at the start of their turn, which will allow them to deal about 15 to 20% extra damage based on their attack stat. So regardless of the condition your allies are in, Regina's a fantastic support unit, and definitely an ally that you'd want to keep close by. The reason that I wanted to talk about her skills first is that one of her weapon effects activates only after Astriam Protocol activates. So Regina's weapon is called Alchemic Blade, and it's based on her skill in Dragalia Lost, Imperial Castling. In Dragalia, that skill deals damage to surrounding enemies and inflicts them with any 2 of the following conditions: Poison, Burn, Paralysis, Stormlash, Flash Burn, Shadow Blight, and Scorch Rend. However, since these conditions don't really exist in Fae, I had to improvise a bit. Alchemic Blade has an accelerated cooldown and deals about 7 to 10 damage for those enemies in 2 spaces of her and the opponent. Regina will also inflict any 2 of the following conditions onto the opponents. There's Gravity, Panic, Guard, or Pulse Smoke. Fatal Smoke, any stat smoke, Isolation, or finally Flash. The opponents will get a combination of any 2 of these, and not every foe you attack will have the same condition. So for example, when fighting against, say, an Edelgard and Dimitri, Edelgard may get inflicted with Fatal Smoke and Flash, whereas Dimitri will get inflicted with Gravity and Isolation. If Astriam Protocol was triggered this turn, then until Regina next initiates combat, or until the end of the first phase that she can, Regina increases the percentage cap of skills that work off of a percentage. I'm thinking it would increase by around 10 to 15%, but basically would mean that Spurn would now block damage up to 50 to 55% of Regina's speed, while Astriam Protocol will heal by 10 to 15% extra than usual. It's an extremely good ability and it's super easy to activate too, which makes Regina a fantastic support unit that can blend in with almost any team. Her stats are fairly just above average aside from a below average defense, but she's got a ton of HP and her utility as a support unit makes up for a middling attacking prowess. Plus if you really like her, you could merge her up and feed her some Dragon Flowers to really make her stand out. I didn't really know what to do for her Super Banes and Super Boons, but I figured she could maybe have a Super Boon in Resistance and maybe either Speed or Defense, and a Super Bane would be in Attack and Speed. I think with the Super Boons and Banes out of the way, that's everything I've got to talk about today about the Apostles, so I hope you enjoyed the video, my dudes. If you enjoyed, please leave a like, a comment on which unit you'd like to try summoning for on this banner, and what other Dragalia characters or other series that you'd like me to discuss in Outrealm Heroes in the future. Also, it would be amazing if you could light a fire under that subscribe button and the bell icon to make sure that you don't miss any one of my videos. And also, check the description to find a link to my Twitch channel where I make a bunch more gaming and anime content live, as well as my Discord server where you can hang out with me and the rest of the community some more too. Again, thank you so much for coming out to the video, and I'll see you in the next one, my dudes. Until next time, bye.